This is a short video to answer a question that was asked on my channel concerning accidentals. So being, if you play flats or sharps, and the question is, sometimes I make mistakes when playing them, and it's very tough to always play the correct ones. And so how do you do it when you improvise? How should you do it to always not worry about these accidentals? And the answer has two parts. The first part is the easy answer to say that, oh yes, you just practice it a lot by playing, a lot in all different scales. So practice the easy scales, G major, but also practice weirder scales, such that if you are stuck in them, or you just modulate by error to them, then you can not worry about the accidentals and be still sort of free. So that's the obvious answer. But the more interesting answer that I do want to talk to you about today is that it's also interesting to not worry too much about making mistakes on accidentals. So why do I mean this? I mean this because there's a usual distinction in many things, and music it can work as well, which is to say that you can separate sometimes syntax and semantics. Semantics is what you mean, and syntax is what you write. And in many ways, you can view accidentals as part of the syntax of music. And what you mean is, for instance, in which positions on the scale you are modulating, or where are you. For instance, if I have a bass which is an ostinato like this, it kind of means I am in one, I am this is in C here. If I do this, I mean a cadenza 5/1. But I write it in a certain way, right? And accidentals are part of this writing. But they are not the semantics itself. They're not what you mean. So the idea is that if you are making mistakes, it might not be that bad, because you might still mean the correct thing. So this sounds a bit weird, so let me give you an example. For instance, you have this Bach piece, BWV 924, which is very beautiful and very classical in terms of harmony, a priori, right? You look at it, so it's... to sight read everything, but it's very short, it's one page. So if you look at this, it's a priori in C. I mean, it is in C major, but the ending is very interesting. So the ending, you arrive to a degree 5, so you still have this kind of tonality of C, but you are on the degree 5 and you want to go back to 1, so do a big cadenza. And so the thing is like this, because if you think about it harmonically, like, oh my god, all accidentals really mean something, which is what I'm saying is not the case. Accidentals don't mean something, they're just a way of writing something. It sounds very complicated because you have many changes in the accidentals. So what is this kind of classical thinking about accidentals? First, let me explain what the normal wisdom is. The normal wisdom is that if you're in a certain tonality, like A major, you have a certain set of accidentals, here, these ones. And if you change one, or if you add one, let's take something easier. For instance, if you're in C major, you have no accidentals, so empty set of normal accidentals. And if you have one, which is not normally here, so for instance, this one, it sounds weird, and what it means is it's a foreign accidental. It's a bit Trump-like, sorry about the terminology. This foreign accidental will induce a tonality transition, because, so this one, for instance, you could easily explain it as being part of G major. So if you are in C and you use this one, it leads you to G, right? And this is how normally you do chord transitions, but I want to maybe hint at the fact that there are some things that are not so easily explained by this common wisdom, but still sound good. And if it sounds good, it must be true, because the ruler in music is what sounds interesting. Theory is just there to help you find stuff that sounds good, right? So to give you an example, sounds good or interesting. Good might not be interesting, and interesting might not be good. So to give you an example, let's take A major again. The set of accidentals, the set of root accidentals is this, right? You have 3. And so to go from A major to A minor, natural minor, let's go natural minor, you normally have to kind of get rid of 3 accidentals, which harmonically is difficult, and you would have to do 3 kind of chord changes, because when you do one change, you can easily get rid of 1 because it sounds normal harmonically. But I think you would agree that it's often the case in music, even classical music, that you can go from one tonality in minor or major sounds okay. And that's interesting because it means, I think, that you have a more modal view on thinking. And the modal transitions, so what modes are really musical modes. So for instance, you have major, minor, sorry, this is not minor, then you have like natural minor, melodic minor, and also other modes you might have heard about. So for instance, the Dorian mode, right? Mixolydian, you have many modes, and there are just ways of dividing a scale into a number of notes. That's just what a mode is. And usually we have major and minor, which are the ones used, but you've also all these other modes, and the modal way of thinking is very useful for improvisation because it allows you to free yourself from this notion that accidentals are really important. And the accidentals are just something that are there because you know, you have to split the octave in some way. But at the end of the day, what you have is sounds, and you're trying to play stuff that sounds good on them. And accidentals are just there to help you play stuff that sounds good. So for instance, here I have a major third, but who cares? Maybe I could have a minor third now. You can have things which are not normal in terms of I have this scale and I really consider the accidentals fixed and still sound good. So here in Bach, I think this is more a modal inspired section. So of course you can still, it works perfectly fine if you want to keep your normal harmony, but you see, in my opinion, this whole thing, so has the semantics of 5/1, right? But it's much more developed at 5/1, right? And that's really interesting because, you know, there are a lot of things that are weird harmonically. So if you take this thing, we're on 5, you do this. And if you think about the common wisdom again, you have this. So this is still conceptually a C major, because at the beginning of this section, you see we pass through the normal accidental of G major, we pass through it and it's not there, so we are conceptually in C. This says, I still have this kind of C tonality, right, or the C accidental, but then here on the degree 5 of C major, I have this, which is quite dissonant if you think about it, right? But it's actually the accidental from G major. So does this lead to a transition in G? No, not at all, because actually what we do is we just remove it literally 2 seconds afterwards. Again, it's there. Okay, again. And we remove it again. Then we have this. And even here, you see, we have this. And then we remove it. So you can explain this, for instance, this ending. You can view it as, I don't know, as this 2/7, maybe even with the 9th, which you then use as a dominant to go there, which allows you to do this resolution, and it's fine. But I think the easier explanation is just that you have the semantics of 5/1, and you have this bass, which is a 5, and then you play whatever sounds good on it. So what sounds good? Well, that's a good question, but there's a way to train your ear to help you answer this question, and the way is to practice sections like this. So sections where you have a bass which fixes a sound, and you train your ear to listen to accidental, to notes with or without accidentals. Don't care about the scales, just care about the sounds. So the first sort of exercise that I would suggest is, maybe if you want to stay in Baroque music, you can find a bass that uses some sort of mode. So here you can try to take these sections, but they are sort of tough because it's still close to normal harmony. And so you're not encouraged to make mistakes. And mistakes are good, because mistakes are what allow you to find new sounds. So let me give you another bass, which is the one from the Fandango by Padre. Beautiful, beautiful piece of music. Listen to it, Padre Fandango. So the bass is like this. I think it's something like this. I just recall it, but... And then on top you can play notes, and if you listen to this bass, it's essentially this mode. So it's sort of Mixolydian mode, and that's very interesting because, you know, it allows you to free yourself from the normal harmony by just listening with your ears. So how do you practice? Well, you learn the bass first. It has to be in your muscle memory, so you don't worry about it. And once it's done, you play it. And you just try to hear before you play something that will sound okay. So for instance, let's start with something easy. A third. You can steal measures from the Fandango and start with these measures, play them, and then you'll see it will inspire you to do small modifications at first, and then have your own little Fandango. So let's start. So I don't know, let's start with the third, because it's safe. This kind of sound. I'm not very inspired here, but I'm sure you can find better. More interesting things. Here I was a bit too safe, staying in this mode. But you can also try to have notes which are not really here, and it can sound very good, especially if you have rhythm, which Padre gives you. very interesting rhythm. So that's a possible exercise. Maybe it's a bit fast. So something you can also do is play with slower things where you really practice this hearing. And here you can also try to have your own mode. So for instance, take a root note like E here, and I don't know, let's have something like this. So we just partition the scale in our own mode. So yeah, this will do. So let's do something like this. and you just listen. So you pop bass, and then you try to find again a major third. Why not? Play with rhythms. Here, it's interesting. So sometimes there are still mistakes, right? These tonalities, these sounds, these sonorities, no, I don't know. Sonorities, yes, I found my word, yes, good. And it's very interesting because then it trains your ear, which is something that we don't think about. We think, I need to learn the scale so that I never make a mistake with the accidentals. But no, you should not do this. You should learn the sound of a major scale, the sound of this scale, and the kind of, you should be able to reproduce the sound if you want to, but you should think in terms of sounds. It's much better, I think. So, for instance, in Baroque music, you know, there's a very noticeable mode, the Dorian mode, which has sort of this medieval tonality. So, sonority, sorry, and it's in part because you have this semi-major minor. The ending of the Dorian so is similar to the end of a natural minor, so it's between minor and major. But for instance, you know that this Dorian mode has this kind of soft minor ending. But you have the harder minor, which is the normal natural minor, not natural, the normal minor, so this one, the one with the sensitive note, and you can also play with it. And so what's interesting is that you can oscillate between Dorian sometimes, and sometimes putting the sensitive note and effectively having a normal minor. So you would have something, so you see here, you can view this as a chord transition from this to this to this to this and this, and this is the folia essentially. Right, this is the folia, which I mentioned. But you can also view this as simply being here, and sometimes. Sometimes being in Dorian and sometimes being with this sensitive note. And this is really interesting. So yes, these are my tips about accidentals. Try to, yes, learn accidentals in the classical form, that they are important and they help you, they help you play correct stuff, but also be careful in not worrying too much about them, because at the end of the day, what's important is what you mean and the sounds that you want to put out there, and accidentals are there to help you. So for instance, if you want good chords, you don't have to worry too much. You can worry more about the sounds that will come out of the chords, right, than the actual accidentals. So for instance, if I do, so let's say I'm here, and I want to go there. So I'm here on this sort of sonority, and I want to go there. It doesn't really matter. I can do, or I can do, or I can do. What I'm saying here is that I'm not thinking at all about the chords. I'm not thinking at all about the chords. I'm just thinking about some sonorities that I might want, and you know, you just don't worry about the accidentals and, oh my god, I need to be in here with an augmented whatever. No. You just think about, I want some sonorities, and you know to reproduce the sonorities by some modes, by some bits of music. So for instance, you know that a major third will sound like this, and a minor third will sound like this. You know that if you are here and you have this, it will sound like this, and you know that if you're in the end of the dorian and you have the sensitive note, it will sound like this. And so it's more assembling sonorities than it's assembling notes. So that's why the most important thing is to train your ear. Well, this was my long parenthesis on why accidentals are important, but you should not worry too much about them. So practice training your ear, and if you make a mistake, and this is the last thing I will say, if you make a mistake, it might be very interesting, and you'll notice that often in Baroque music, if you are, I don't know if this happened to you, I'm curious, it happens to me sometimes when I play pieces, you are, you know, working on them slowly, and slowly it sounds weird. So for instance, you have this, you could, let me play this Bach again, so you have, okay, this is correct. And it sounds a bit weird, right? If I played this as more an ostinato, right, you have... Sometimes if you play them very slowly, it sounds weird, but it works when you play it like a resonance, right? So... it plays when you play it like a flux is because Baroque music is very horizontal. It's much more about the melodies than about the vertical chords, which might sound bad. And so it's very important to have this freedom of thinking that you have sonorities and you just play a mode and you just oscillate with the accidentals. There's a lot of kind of medieval, you know, music of people singing in a church, and they try these more, you know, like the Corsican chants and this type of music in Baroque music. It is there underlying, so that's interesting, I think. So very many thanks for asking the question about accidentals. I'm sorry about this kind of long response. It's the third time I record this video because I'm an idiot and my like memory card you know, was full and stuff like this. But I think I hopefully finally did it, and hopefully it still helps you a little bit. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I'll be more than happy to answer them, and see you soon. Bye bye.